My name is Lydia Heinen. Today is August 24th, 2016. The time is 4:07 p.m. and we are at St. John's Northwestern Military Academy. I am interviewing Harold Boehler, who was born in 1926 and served in World War II between 1944 and 1946. Harold was a third-class radarman in the U.S. Navy Reserve in the Pacific Theater and served as a helmsman, radarman, and gunner. This interview is sponsored by the Bell Tower Memorial. Hello, Harry.
Hi, how are you, Lydia?
Good, how are you?
Good.
So, you enlisted in the military, correct?
Right.
What were you doing before you enlisted?
I was in high school, Clintonville High School, and a number of us went down to Appleton to enlist in the Navy. And at Appleton, they sent us down to Milwaukee, Wisconsin, and we went through physical tests. And those of us that passed, they swore into the Navy Reserve and sent us back home to finish high school. So 4 days after high school, I found myself on a train to Chicago, Great Lakes Training Center in Chicago.
I see. Was there anything special that inspired you to enlist?
Well, World War II. We couldn't wait to get in to serve our country. So as many of us, some of us were, I was 17, my friends were also 17, but we had to get our parents' permission to enter, which we did.
I see. Did you have any prior knowledge before you enlisted of the war?
Well, just what we heard over radio and the papers.
Could you describe a little bit about your early training and how you adapted to military life?
Well, at Great Lakes, we went through boot training. We were 3 weeks in boot training. Usually it was 6 weeks, but they wanted to get us out to sea as soon as possible, so cut it down to 3 weeks.
Where else did you go in the United States?
Well, then after that, I went home for a 14-day furlough. And then after that, I went back to Chicago and we went over to Norfolk, Virginia for amphibious training. We were there about 2 weeks on shore training. And then we had 2 weeks on board the landing ship medium, 2 weeks at sea, and trained beach landings and what have you for 2 weeks. And then shortly after that, we were sent down to Texas on a troop train. In Texas, Houston, Texas, we waited for our ship to be built, finished building at Brown Shipyard in Galveston. And we had shore duty at night. We had it pretty good. The Navy had it pretty good because we didn't have to be back to base until 8 o'clock in the morning. But the Air Force and the Army had to be back by 12 and 2 o'clock on weekends. So we had pretty good shore duty after hours. Then we picked up our ship in Galveston and went out to trials and shakedown tours, they called it. And we were 3 days on shakedown, going through as rough as we could and put our ship through everything, and then came back and they fixed every little thing that went wrong. And then we were ordered to go up to Norfolk, Virginia again. So we had spent Christmas Day along the coast of North Florida and went up to Norfolk. And then we trained 5 crews up there, 2 weeks in each training session, and got our orders to go overseas.
What was the name of the ship that you were stationed on?
Landing Ship Medium 107.
And where did you travel?
Well, after we left Norfolk, we went down through the Panama Canal and up the coast of South Florida, South Carolina, and up to San Diego, California. We were at San Diego for a couple of days, and then we went up to San Francisco for a couple of days and got supplies. We didn't carry troops at that time, but we did get supplies to take to Hawaii. And we got out to Hawaii and spent several weeks out there training troops landing with different islands. And one of them, I remember, the big island, had black sand. And that stuck in my mind for years. But we landed some Marines on that. We didn't have ducks at that time. The Marines had a unit called water buffalo, and they were like a duck, but they were smaller. And the Marines would land, and then we'd pick them back up at sea and try to get those things on board with waves coming this way and that. It was pretty difficult, but we did get them aboard. And we carried a lot of ducks, the same things that you see up there at the Dells. We carried 6 to 8 of those and the crews, and we'd train on beaches. And after Hawaii, several weeks, we got orders to head for the Philippines. Should I go on?
Yes.
We got to Guam on the way to the Philippines, just an overnight and supplies, and then Kwajalein, some more supplies. Kwajalein was a strip probably about 4 to 6 feet above seawater, and a good wave would wash over it. But they had, it was a refueling area. So we stopped there and got fuel for our engines, and then on to the Philippines. And we went back and forth in the Philippines, sometimes loaded and sometimes not loaded with equipment. But we were at Leyte, Tacloban, Leyte, and you might have read a couple years ago, a big storm, big typhoon went through there and wiped out most of the village. We were there, and they warned us at night. We anchored out about, I'd say about a half mile offshore. And they warned us that to be on guard because the Japanese would swim out to the ships and tie grenades at on the propellers and blow up the propellers to decommission your ship. So we had guards on deck, on the port and starboard side and the bow and the stern with rifles and guns. And one night, one of the guys with the Thompson's machine gun started opening fire at a box that was coming towards our ship. And the box quit coming towards the ship. But he didn't see anybody. He doesn't know whether there was a Japanese behind it or not. The captain came up and, what's going on here? And he told him what happened. So he said, good job, keep alert. And so we had guys all night manning those posts. We did a lot of traveling between islands. Mainly, most of ours was on Luzon. The biggest island, that's where Manila was and what have you. we went up there and went through Corregidor and Bataan Island into Manila, and there was Japanese ships sunk all over the place. We had to guide our ship between sunken ships. Then we got orders to go. We loaded up with Army Americal Division troops and their equipment, and were instructed to go up to Okinawa. And we got up there, and there was a tremendous amount of ships out there, thousands, just thousands, all sizes and makes. And we got there, and they dropped a second bomb. We were loaded with invasion troops for Japan, and they dropped a second atomic bomb, and so we didn't have to go to Japan, the invasion. We dropped our troops off, invasion troops off on Okinawa, then back to the Philippines, got some more troops and equipment for occupation troops of Japan, and then went up to Japan, Yokohama, Japan. We got Yokohama, and the order went out that we're downloading our equipment and troops. The order went out that no one was supposed to go ashore. 5 of us said we didn't hear the order and went off on the shore looking for souvenirs. We didn't find anything because it was all bombed out. There wasn't anything salvageable. So when we came back to the dock, our ship was not there. It was anchored out about 2 miles out in the bay. We had to get a ride back. So we asked another captain if he'd give us a ride back. And he asked us, do we have any films aboard ship, movies? We said, yeah. So he had his radio man radio our ship, find out what films they were. He didn't see them, so he said, okay, I'll take you out. We tied up alongside, and when we stepped over our rail onto his ship, over the rail onto our ship, Chief Boatswain mate is there, and he says, you're under arrest. And so down to the captain's quarters, we got a captain's mast, what they call a captain's mast. 10 days extra duty, 2 hours a day, you had to work it off, and no liberty until it was worked off. But we didn't care about that because we were going back to the Philippines, and it'd take us at least 10 days to get back.
Very interesting.
But the order went out, this was the kicker, there will be no grade increases while I'm captain aboard ship. And we were all eligible for a grade increase. That meant we weren't going to get it. So, but we did later.
All right. You briefly mentioned the planned invasion of Japan. Could you talk a little bit more about that?
Well, I found all of the key instructions later on through research. We would have been probably the second or third group to land, and the Japs were, from what I read, were waiting for us, waiting for the invasion. They knew exactly where we were going to invade, and I doubt if I'd be here today if we would have had to go through with that.
What were your duties specifically on the ship?
Well, I had 3 main duties. One was helmsman, that's steering the ship. The other was,
with a stick?
yeah, I should got a picture of that. We had electrical steering.
All right.
So that was one of my main duties, 4 hours on, 8 hours off. Then I was striking for a radar man, and after I became a radar man, and that was my main duty. on radar. But I was also subject to being a helmsman in case of need. And the third main job I had was a 20 millimeter gunner during general quarters and battle stations. So those are the three main jobs that I had.
What kind of stuff did you do with radar technology?
With radar technology? Well, there was when we were in the Philippines, there was a number of channels that were pretty narrow between islands. And we were traveling between Leyte and Samar one evening. It was foggy. It was really foggy. I couldn't see you from here to you. And the officers on the top conning tower were giving instructions, and I was on the helm at that time, steering. And he gave instructions to come right 5 degrees. And I called up and I said, "We can't come right, sir, we'll go aground." And he said, "Well, why not?" And I said, I got land right to the right, and we'll go aground if we go right. So he came down and spent the rest of the 4 hours in the conning tower with me on the radar set.
All right. So what were some memorable moments that you can think of while you were on duty?
Memorable moments. Well, we, in Japan, our first trip to Japan, we were at a beach and we had a big 50-gallon can out on the beach with holes punched in it and wood for a fire to keep warm, for the watch to keep warm. And this little boy came up and he's warming himself. He didn't have any shoes. He didn't have much of a clothing. So we took him aboard, and I was the smallest guy aboard ship. So one of the guys cut some pants and a shirt and down for this young boy. I think he was about 11 or 12. All he could say is, "Hi, Joe, me, Mike." And I took my shoes and put on about 3 pairs of socks on him and stuffed paper in the toes of the shoes, and he was clumping around with those. But we had him for a couple of days until we found out from the Red Cross that he had family back in Okinawa, so they shipped him back. Another trip, we were up there in Japan, our second trip. We met this mother and a couple of daughters. Her husband was a school teacher, we found out. And one day the Army came and took him away. They never saw him or heard from him again. But we befriended that family and took them flour and sugar and canned goods and stuff, and fed them for about 3 days while we were at Tokyo. That was 2 good memories that I remember.
I see. Were there any struggles that you had adjusting to the military?
Any what?
Struggles?
Any struggles?
Did you make friends?
Oh,
easily?
yeah. Well, everybody, we were all shipmates. And not just shipmates, but we were brothers. And we treated each other like a brother and got along together. And it was, and we kept friends. 43 years later, 12 of us got together for the first time. And of course, I was on a plane out of Milwaukee, and we stopped at Madison and picked up some more passengers. And one of the guys of our ship was on that plane. Neither he nor I recognized each other. But we had a good good ship reunion, we kept that up for about 10 years.
What would you consider to be your most important contribution during your service?
My most important, just being there, being part of the U.S. Navy and doing what I could.
Could you share any example of strong leadership that you encountered during the military?
Well, we were in San Francisco ready to go overseas, and this young officer came aboard, and he says, "Hey guys, you got to help me, you got to train me, I've never been on a ship before." So that was part of our duty, training this young officer on our duties, and he became a good officer and a good friend.
That was a good example of leadership, you'd say?
Yeah.
Yeah. All right. Do you want to talk about any awards you received from your?
Well, I just got medals from areas, the World War II Victory Medal, American Campaign, Asiatic Pacific Medal, and the Philippine Liberation Medal. And later on, we got the Occupation of Japan Medal.
So I see you brought some photos. Do you want to talk about these?
Yeah. Well, a number of years ago, Omaha, Nebraska, I forget what year that was, we found a landing ship like ours over in Greece, and it was out of commission and rusted out. So they hired I belonged to an organization called the LSMR Association, and they found this ship over there that was not used, so we bought it, hired a Russian tug to tow it back to the United States, up the Mississippi River and the Missouri River to Omaha, Nebraska. And I forget what year that was, but my 2 daughters and 3 granddaughters and my wife and I went out to Omaha to visit the ship. And that was great to see that old clunker there. It was rusted out. And we were given a good tour of the ship, and I was allowed to go into areas that other people couldn't go. One is during our trip from Japan back to Okinawa, we were in a typhoon, and we got 40-foot high waves, and we got a big crack in the stern of the ship, and water was pouring in. So we had electric steering, and our electric motors were in that area that was flooding. So we had to turn them off and go down and steer by this 4-foot diameter metal steering in the stern, wading in waters up to our knees. And we did that for a good day and a half before we got into calm water to keep up with the water coming in. That was a time. This is a shot of the ship towards the bow. The 40mm cannon was up here, someplace on here. I got it there. Here's the twin 40s right there. We had twin 40s. That was the biggest gun we had. We had 4 20mm guns. I was on one of them. And then before we went overseas, we had 7 50 caliber machine guns put on. When we were in Okinawa, the kamikaze planes were coming in. There's a difference between a suicide bomber and a kamikaze bomber. The suicide bomber is trained to go out, fly out, unload his bombs or do whatever he was assigned to do and return to base. The kamikaze pilot was trained one way, loaded with as much ammunition and stuff he could, and to fly into ships and stuff and just put them out of commission. Well, they were coming over when we were at Okinawa, and we had to man our guns and stuff. But we were told not to fire our guns because the bigger ships had bigger cannons on board. They can shoot further. So we were told to make smoke, and that made smoke to cover, disguise the bigger ships. And our smoke generator caught fire. And captain is yelling at the engineering officer, "Put that damn fire out, we're a beacon for the kamikaze." So that was exciting. Our quarters, we had 4 bunks in a row, and mine was the top bunk. We had a stair right there, and I could climb right in my bunk. But and we had a ship's part of the head. I got this part, but I didn't show the other part. This is the galley, the cooking area. Oh, that's another duty I had when I asked, because the chief boatswain mate was on my back all the time, making me clean the head and as primary duty. I wanted to get out from under his thumb, so I asked the cook to pick me for a mess cook, and that we served, 2 of us served the meals to the rest of the crew, and that way I got out from under the boats. But that was a 6-week job, and we had to get up early in the morning, help get stuff, peel potatoes and stuff. It was, at least I got out from the boats' thumb.
What were some of the life lessons that you learned from the military service?
What was what?
What were some of the life lessons you learned?
Some of the life lessons? Well, and I carried this through my life. Teamwork. Everything you did aboard ship was teamwork. And I learned that profession throughout my whole life. And I applied it in my work schedule when I supervised people. And I have teamwork to get the job done right. And that was one of the most significant things I learned.
All right. How do you want other people to remember World War II and the impacts it made? Is there anything you want other people to remember from World War II?
Well, wars are, oh, okay, some come back. My granddaughter one time asked me to come to her grade school to talk to the students about World War II. And during this discussion, I brought up the fact of we dropped the 2 atomic bombs, wiped out hundreds of thousands of people each bomb. One little boy raised his hand and he said, "Mr. Boehler, was that an honorable bomb?" Think of that a minute. How would you answer that? And I thought for a few seconds and I said, "No. Bombs are made to kill, damage things, and kill people. So there is no honorable bombs." That's one of the lessons that I learned, and that's something we all have to remember.
All right. What advice would you give to any men and women who currently are considering joining the military?
I think, no, I'm gonna go preface this towards men. I think it would do them good to join the A service for a couple of years. It helps them grow and how to get along with other people and do things together. And I think for any young man, it'd be a good thing to do, is get in and learn. And you can learn a trade too. But now we've got women getting in too, so I guess it applies to them too.
All right. In closing, this has been an interview of Harold Boehler and his time during serving in World War II from 1944 to 1946. My name is Lydia Heinen, and the time is 4:38. Thank you, Harold, for agreeing to this interview, and most of all, thank you for your service.
Thank you, Lydia.
Yeah.
Oh, I was known as Shorty.
That's right.
When I talked to my friends on the phone, I'd say, "Hi, this is Harry calling." "Who?" "Shorty." "Oh, Shorty." So all my Navy friends know me by the term Shorty.
Thank you.
Thank you, Lydia.